Judge Robert Keller sat behind a large wooden bench, his face a mask of concentration as he scanned the courtroom. He'd been a judge for over 20 years, and by now, cases like this one, a routine traffic fine, no longer surprised him. He knew what to expect: defendants apologizing, trying to explain their reasons, maybe asking for leniency. But ultimately, the law was the law, and his job was to enforce it. In front of him sat Tasha Williams, a poised black woman in her mid-30s, wearing a professional, well-put-together outfit that matched her confidence. She had been calm and respectful since entering the courtroom, her demeanor never wavering despite the minor charge she was facing. Tasha was no stranger to courtrooms, but unlike many others who might feel a sense of nervousness, she seemed almost unbothered. It was clear she understood the system, how it worked, and how it could be manipulated, though not always in her favor. "You were caught speeding in a school zone." Judge Keller's voice broke the silence. "The camera footage is clear, and your explanation, while noted, does not change the facts." Tasha nodded, her eyes steady but sharp, her voice steady as she responded. "I understand, Your Honor. I admit that I was speeding, but it wasn't intentional. I was trying to make it to an important meeting that could affect my career. It won't happen again." Judge Keller's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his tone taking on an edge. "Your circumstances don't alter the law, Ms. Williams. Speeding in a school zone is dangerous, and while I understand your meeting may have been important, the safety of children must come first." He flipped through the papers in front of him, his decision already made. He was known for being tough on traffic violations, seeing them as clear-cut issues that had no place for leniency. A minor offense like this was still an offense, and Keller believed people should face the consequences of their actions. "I'm imposing a fine of $500, Judge Keller declared firmly. Case dismissed. Tasha didn't flinch. She accepted the ruling with a nod. But internally, she was already processing the underlying truth that made this moment feel more like an experience she had grown all too familiar with. She had been respectful, she had been honest, and yet the outcome was predictable. The system was impartial, or at least that's how it appeared from the outside. As she gathered her things and made her way toward the door, Tasha couldn't help but think of the countless others who had come before this judge, people of color, people from different walks of life, who might have faced similar outcomes. It was clear to her that the legal system, in all its fairness, sometimes didn't take into account the nuances of real life. She left the courtroom, her mind racing with thoughts of what came next, unaware that this very encounter would set a series of events into motion that would challenge both her and Judge Keller in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Judge Robert Keller had built his reputation, slowly, methodically, over the years. He had risen through the ranks of local courts and earned a spot on the federal bench after years of relentless dedication to the law. To him, being a judge wasn't just a career, it was a calling. His worldview was shaped by principles of strict justice, an unwavering belief that the law was neutral and that it didn't favor anyone. In his mind, that's how the system worked best. Everyone was treated equally, regardless of who they were. He had a reputation in the courthouse for being tough but fair. He took pride in his ability to make quick decisions, rarely second-guessing his judgments. While other judges might take days to deliberate over a ruling, Keller made up his mind almost instantly, trusting his instincts and years of experience. He saw himself as a protector of order and stability, keeping the wheels of justice running smoothly. For him, there was little room for nuance in most cases. The law was the law, and his role was to enforce it. He was particularly well known for his adherence to traffic violations, a segment of the court that often seemed like a formality to others, but was something Keller took seriously. In his eyes, small infractions like speeding or parking violations reflected a lack of respect for the rules that kept society functioning. He didn't believe in offering leniency, not when lives could be at stake, even if the offense seemed minor. A speeding ticket wasn't just about going too fast. It was about setting an example, maintaining control, and demonstrating that every law, no matter how small, was sacred. Judge Keller had a quiet, steadfast confidence that led many to view him as a model of integrity. His colleagues spoke highly of his efficiency, his attention to detail, and his willingness to take on difficult cases. He never allowed himself to be swayed by emotions or personal circumstances. In his eyes, the law was always impartial, and it was up to him to interpret it with clarity and consistency. But there was something Keller didn't always consider: the way that his decisions, though always made with the best of intentions, might not always be as fair as he believed. The law, as he understood it, could sometimes miss the deeper stories behind the people standing before him. It was something he never questioned, at least not until the day he met Tasha Williams. When he imposed the fine on her, he did so with the same calm authority he had applied to hundreds of cases before hers. To him, it was just another violation in a long list of similar cases. But what Keller didn't know, what he couldn't have known in that moment, was that Tasha Williams wasn't just another defendant. She was someone whose influence on the legal system reached far beyond the walls of his courtroom. And soon, it would challenge everything he thought he knew about justice and fairness. Days after Tasha Williams left the courtroom, Judge Keller continued with his routine, presiding over cases and feeling as though his decision regarding her was just another in a long line of simple rulings. But when an unexpected letter arrived on his desk, it set in motion a series of events that would soon shake the foundation of everything he thought he knew. The letter was from the Federal Judicial Association, an organization dedicated to professional development and judicial reform. At first glance, it looked like any other piece of correspondence regarding upcoming seminars or conferences, but then Keller's eyes stopped on something unusual. Among the invited speakers and mentors for an upcoming seminar on judicial reform, he saw her name: Tasha Williams. The same Tasha Williams he had just fined for a traffic violation. Keller's initial reaction was confusion. How could she be involved in a judicial reform seminar? He had dismissed her so quickly in his courtroom, labeling her just another defendant with a minor infraction. Now, here she was, listed as one of the key mentors for judges across the country, an influential voice in shaping the future of the very system he was a part of. Keller frowned, suddenly aware that there was far more to this woman than he had ever imagined. The letter explained that Tasha had spent years mentoring judges and lawyers, guiding them on everything from legal practices to the importance of cultural competence in the courtroom. She was recognized as a prominent figure in promoting diversity and fairness within the federal judiciary. What startled Keller most, though, was that the seminar's focus wasn't just about courtroom procedures or legal tactics. It was about something more profound: understanding the nuances of justice and the need for empathy within the law. He spent the next few days researching Tasha, digging into her background and reading about her work. It became clear that she was no ordinary lawyer or mentor. She was a woman who had faced numerous challenges throughout her life: racial biases, systemic inequality, and more, and had used those experiences to fuel her passion for reform. Her advocacy for inclusivity and her focus on creating a fairer legal system had earned her the respect of judges, lawyers, and legal scholars alike. Keller was struck by the depth of her work and the number of people she had influenced. But still, his mind struggled to reconcile the woman he had found with the woman he was reading about in these articles. How could someone with such a profound impact on the legal community be the same person who had been sitting in front of him just days ago? The realization slowly began to settle in. He had underestimated her. And in doing so, he may have missed an opportunity to see justice in a way he never had before. As Keller mulled over the implications of his actions, something inside him stirred. He had always prided himself on being a fair and just judge, but now, for the first time, he began to wonder if his understanding of fairness had been incomplete. What did it truly mean to be impartial? And could the law really be neutral when it ignored the deeper truths of the people it impacted? This question lingered in Keller's mind, and it was one that would lead him down an unexpected path. A path that would bring him face to face with the very woman he had dismissed, and in doing so, force him to confront everything he thought he knew about justice. The more Judge Keller thought about Tasha Williams, the more unsettled he became. He had prided himself on being a judge who understood the law, who made decisions based on the facts, and who saw everyone in his courtroom as equals. But now he was grappling with the growing realization that he might have missed something crucial. Tasha Williams wasn't just another person who had broken the law. She was someone with a powerful voice in the legal world, someone whose work had challenged the very system he had spent his career upholding. Late one night, Keller sat alone in his office, staring at the papers scattered across his desk. He was reviewing case files and preparing for his next hearing, but his mind kept drifting back to Tasha. He couldn't shake the image of her sitting before him in his courtroom, calm and composed, as he imposed the fine. At the time, it had felt like a routine decision. She had broken the law. He had to enforce the law. But now, the more he thought about it, the more that decision seemed shallow. Was it truly about the law? Or had his judgment been influenced by something else? Keller's hand hovered over the case file for his next hearing, but he found himself unable to focus. The questions he had about his role as a judge kept swirling in his mind. He had always believed that the law was neutral, that it didn't discriminate, that it applied equally to everyone. But was that true? Had he ever really taken the time to understand the lives of the people who came before him? How often had he simply made decisions based on what was in front of him, the facts of the case, the letter of the law, without considering the context of each individual's life? He thought back to the countless cases he had ruled over, speeding tickets, minor infractions, petty crimes, and he began to wonder how many of those people had been treated fairly, especially those who came from marginalized communities. He had never questioned his approach before. The law was the law, and it was his job to apply it. But now, for the first time, Keller found himself doubting whether his rigid adherence to the law might have blinded him to the complexities of the real world. The next day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Tasha had unknowingly planted a seed of doubt in him, and it had grown into something that couldn't be easily ignored. Keller found himself staring at the invitation to the Judicial Reform Seminar, where Tasha was a mentor, unsure whether he should attend. On the one hand, he didn't know if he was ready to confront his own biases and limitations. On the other, he realized that this might be the only opportunity to learn something that could change the way he viewed his role as a judge. He had always seen himself as a protector of the law, but now he was starting to see that perhaps there was more to justice than simply enforcing the rules. Maybe it was time to open his mind to the possibility that there were gaps in his understanding. Gaps that needed to be filled if he were ever to truly serve the people in his courtroom. Keller made a decision. He would attend the seminar. He didn't know what he would learn or how it would change him, but he knew he had to try. As he put the invitation into his bag, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation, mixed with a healthy dose of uncertainty. What would he find when he finally opened his eyes to the complexities of the justice system? And how would his encounter with Tasha Williams change the way he approached his work from that point forward? There was only one way to find out. Tasha Williams stood before the packed room, her words flowing effortlessly as she spoke about the importance of judicial reform. As a federal court mentor, she had spent years working behind the scenes to shape the minds of judges, helping them understand not just the law, but the human lives affected by their decisions. She was known for her calm yet powerful presence, for her ability to challenge even the most entrenched beliefs without causing offense. Her goal wasn't to tear down the system, but to help people like Judge Keller see it with clearer eyes, to help them realize that the law could not be impartial when it ignored the realities of those it was meant to serve. Tasha's path to this role had not been easy. She had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, and the legal system often seemed like a distant, unfathomable force that worked against her community. She had witnessed firsthand how the law could disproportionately affect people of color, how minor infractions could lead to life-altering consequences. Her own family had been touched by the justice system, and she had watched as her relatives navigated the complexities of the system, that was often indifferent to their struggles. Despite these challenges, Tasha had always believed in the power of education and reform. She was determined to become a lawyer, to not just fight for her community, but to help shape a system that would offer more than just blind justice. She worked tirelessly through law school, facing obstacles at every turn, but she graduated near the top of her class. Her legal career quickly took off, and she found herself in positions where she could begin making a real impact, not just through her cases, but by mentoring the next generation of judges and attorneys. But her work wasn't easy. Tasha had often found herself as the only person of color in rooms full of people who didn't share her experiences. Her colleagues respected her intelligence and her passion, but there were moments when she felt like an outsider, a voice calling for change in an institution that didn't always want to hear it. The resistance to reform was real, and it wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in the very fabric of the legal profession itself. Her role as a mentor was one of the most important parts of her career. She believed that real change could only happen if the people in power understood their role in shaping the system. Tasha's mission wasn't to impose her views, but to open minds, to help judges and lawyers recognize the biases they might unknowingly harbor, and to encourage them to be more empathetic in their approach to justice. She had worked with hundreds of judges, helping them navigate the complexities of fairness, and she had seen the difference it made. When judges understood their own biases and were open to new perspectives, they ruled with more compassion and more clarity. As Tasha prepared for another seminar, she reflected on the work that still lay ahead. She knew that the battle for a more equitable legal system was far from over, but she was hopeful. Change was slow, but it was happening. Her story, her journey, was one of resilience, of never giving up on the dream of a more just world, no matter how many obstacles stood in her way. Little did she know that one of the judges she had worked so hard to influence, one of the men whose decisions she would soon challenge in the most unexpected of ways, was about to walk into her life in a way she hadn't anticipated. The man who had fined her just days ago would soon become not just a colleague, but a partner in her mission to reform the legal system. The Judicial Reform Seminar was in full swing, and Judge Robert Keller found himself surrounded by a room full of people who seemed to know far more than he did about the intricacies of fairness in the legal system. He had entered with a sense of hesitation, unsure of what to expect. He knew he had to be here, knew it was important, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was somewhat out of place. As he took his seat among the other judges, he scanned the room, his thoughts still lingering on Tasha Williams. He had seen her speak earlier that day, and there was no denying the impact of her words. She had a way of making even the most rigid legal concepts seem like they were intertwined with human lives, something that had always been abstract for Keller. For the first time in his career, Keller felt a strange sense of discomfort, the kind that came when you realized you weren't as certain about something as you once thought you were. As the seminar continued, Keller's mind wandered back to the moment when he had imposed the fine on Tasha. It seemed so trivial at the time. But now, seeing her as a mentor at this seminar, hearing the depth of her ideas about judicial reform, Keller couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. This woman had far more to offer than he had ever considered. What had he missed? The seminar broke for lunch, and as Keller walked toward the dining area, he saw Tasha standing by a table, talking to a small group of judges. Her calm confidence stood out even in a crowd of accomplished professionals. Keller hesitated for a moment, then decided to approach her. "Tasha," he said, his voice sounding slightly unsure, even to his own ears. She turned to face him, her expression warm but curious. "Judge Keller," she replied with a slight nod. There was no animosity in her voice, no judgment. It was as if she was meeting an old acquaintance, not the same man who had fined her just days ago. Her grace disarmed him immediately. I wanted to apologize for the way things went in my courtroom," Keller began, his words feeling heavier than he had expected. "When I fined you, I didn't know who you were. I didn't know the work you do, the impact you've had. It was a mistake." Tasha listened quietly, her eyes never leaving his. She had expected some kind of acknowledgement, But hearing the apology felt different. It was sincere, she could tell. She appreciated it, but more than that, she saw this as an opportunity, a chance to bridge the gap that so often separated those in power from those pushing for change. "Thank you, Judge Keller," she said after a moment, her voice calm but firm. "I understand that your job isn't easy, and the work you do is incredibly important, but we both know that sometimes the law doesn't see people as they are. It's not enough to simply apply the law. We need to understand the people who are in front of us." Keller nodded, her words resonating deeply with him. "I've been thinking a lot about that lately," he admitted. "I thought the law was enough, that it was neutral. But now, I'm not so sure." Tasha smiled, sensing a shift in him. "That's a good start," she said. "It's not about abandoning the law, Judge. It's about understanding that justice isn't just about rules. It's about people. And once you see that, everything else changes." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the weight of their shared conversation settling between them. Keller knew that this meeting wasn't just a chance encounter. It was the beginning of something much bigger. He had come to the seminar looking for answers, but what he had found was a mentor in the very person he had once dismissed. Tasha's presence, her understanding, had already begun to challenge his view of justice in ways he hadn't anticipated. The road ahead was uncertain, but Keller knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the same man who had walked into this room just a few hours ago. And that, he realized, was only the beginning. As the seminar continued, Judge Keller found himself drawn into discussions that challenged his most fundamental beliefs about the law. What started as an uncomfortable, somewhat passive experience gradually evolved into a turning point in his career. He had come to learn about judicial reform, but what he was discovering was far more profound. It was no longer just about the law. It was about the people affected by the law, and how an understanding of their lived experiences could radically reshape a judge's approach to justice. During one of the breakout sessions, Keller found himself sitting next to Tasha once again. She was listening intently to a speaker, but she turned to him when she felt his gaze. There was no need for words. He could see it in her expression. She had been patient with him, giving him the space to arrive at his own conclusions. And now, it seemed, she was waiting for him to take the next step. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said earlier," Keller began, his voice soft but sure, "about seeing the people, not just the cases. I've always believed that my job was to be impartial, to follow the law without letting anything else influence my decisions. But now I'm wondering, maybe it's not enough." Tasha smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "It's a hard realization for many judges," she replied. "But the law isn't just about what's written in black and white. It's about context, about understanding the circumstances behind each case. People don't come to court in a vacuum. They have histories, struggles, and experiences that shape their actions. If we don't see that, we're missing half the story." Keller nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent so many years viewing the law as a set of rules to be applied evenly to all that he had never considered the larger framework in which those rules operated. What had felt like fairness to him had, at times, been blind justice. Justice that failed to account for the realities of inequality, bias, and human error. "I think I've been so focused on being consistent, on making sure my decisions are clear-cut, that I've neglected to consider how my rulings impact the people who stand before me," Keller admitted. "I've never stopped to ask whether the system itself might be flawed in ways I can't see." Tasha placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of support. "It's not easy," she said softly, "but the fact that you're questioning it now is a huge step, and it's never too late to change. The work we do as judges is powerful, but it's also incredibly difficult. We have to be open to growth, to learning from our mistakes, and to seeing the world through the eyes of others." Keller's mind was racing. He had spent so many years in his profession, convinced that he understood justice. But now, it felt like he was only just beginning to scratch the surface. The law, as he had always known it, was only one piece of a much larger puzzle, one that involved empathy, humility, and the willingness to challenge assumptions. That evening, as the seminar came to a close, Keller found himself reflecting on everything he had learned. Tasha had opened his eyes in ways he hadn't anticipated, and the shift in his thinking was profound. The work ahead wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be immediate, but he knew one thing for certain. His approach to the law and to justice had changed, and it was no longer just about enforcing rules. It was about serving people, all people, no matter their background or circumstances. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew he couldn't turn back. And for the first time in a long time, Keller felt a sense of hope about the future of the justice system. A hope that, with the right guidance, real change was possible. In the weeks following the seminar, Judge Robert Keller returned to his courtroom with a renewed sense of purpose. He had spent hours reflecting on everything he had learned from Tasha and the other mentors at the seminar. But the real challenge now was applying it in his daily work. He had to rethink the way he approached every case, every decision, and most importantly, the people who walked through his courtroom doors. Tasha, too, had noticed the subtle but significant shift in Keller. She had been in contact with him a few times after the seminar, offering guidance and sharing insights from her years of work in judicial reform. Their conversations were thoughtful, filled with a mutual respect for each other's roles, and Keller's questions began to show a deeper understanding of the complex issues that had once seemed black and white to him. Keller's first test came sooner than he expected. A case involving a young black man named Jamar, who had been caught in a minor drug-related offense, landed on his docket. The young man had a criminal record, and on paper, his case was simple. The law had been broken, and the punishment should be straightforward. But Keller knew that Tasha's words still echoed in his mind. He needed to understand Jamar's story, not just the facts of the case. When Jamar appeared before him, Keller took a different approach. Instead of immediately laying out the punishment, Keller asked questions he had never thought to ask before. He asked Jamar about his upbringing, about his struggles, about what led him down the path he had taken. Jamar hesitated at first, but as Keller listened patiently, something shifted. The young man began to open up, telling Keller about growing up in a neighborhood rife with crime, about a broken home, and about the systemic obstacles he had faced that had led him to make poor decisions. For the first time in his career, Keller saw a defendant as more than just a case number. He saw Jamar as a young man who had been shaped by circumstances beyond his control. He saw the flaws in the system, in the way it failed to address the root causes of crime and injustice, and he began to wonder if there could be another way to address this, a way that didn't just punish, but offered a chance at redemption. Keller paused before delivering his judgment. This was no longer just about applying the law as it was written. It was about offering Jamar a chance to rebuild his life. He decided to give him probation with mandatory counseling and community service. But Keller also made a commitment to follow up, to ensure that Jamar had the support he needed to break the cycle of crime that had been part of his life for far too long. When Tasha heard about the case, she was deeply impressed. Keller had made the decision based on understanding, not just the facts. It wasn't leniency. It was justice, redefined. He had applied the law, but he had done so with empathy and a recognition that the law wasn't always enough on its own. Their partnership grew stronger from that point on. Tasha continued to mentor Keller, challenging him when he needed it and offering insight when he was unsure. Together, they worked on advocacy projects, aiming to reform not just the decisions made in courtrooms, but the very structure of the legal system itself. Over time, Judge Keller became known for his thoughtful, compassionate approach to justice, a reputation that was far removed from the rigid, impersonal judge he had once been. Tasha, too, found that the partnership had changed her. She no longer saw herself as someone working in isolation. She had someone alongside her in the fight for a more equitable system. In the end, both Keller and Tasha knew they had found something extraordinary in each other, a shared commitment to justice, not as a set of rules, but as a powerful force that could heal, restore, and bring true equality to the lives it touched. Together, they had set out to change the system, and in doing so, had changed each other forever.